Hi, this is Jurgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis vlog. In this episode, I want to do a little contrastive analysis of how the psychological illusion model compares to metacognitive therapy and the three principles. Know before I get into this that this comparative analysis is biased as hell because I obviously teach this model called the psychological illusion model. So, given that, I'm obviously very biased. But I want to look at how these different frameworks are similar and how they are different based upon my own very subjective understanding and experiments with these different ways of understanding experience. Now, one reason why I want to do this is because sometimes people ask me what other modalities or way of understanding kind of meshes with the psychological illusion model that you teach. And it's very easy for me to answer that because the way I understand it, there are two kind of popular frameworks that are a very good fit with the psychological illusion model. One of them is metacognitive therapy, and the other one is the three principles. We could also add non-duality teachings to this. So how are they similar? Well, here's an interesting observation. If you were to talk to a lot of my clients who used to be very anxious or very depressed or very obsessed and who no longer are, and I'm not assuming that that's the case for all of my clients here, by the way. I'm not claiming that all of my clients benefit or change. But if you were to talk to the people who do, one of the most typical responses that you would get is, you know what? I used to have a lot of thinking around that, and now I hardly think about it anymore. So what you very often see is way less thinking. And that's one common denominator between the psychological illusion model, metacognitive therapy, and the three principles, is that they all emphasize that you can leave your thinking alone. You don't have to do anything whatsoever about the thoughts that appear. And this is a strong contrast to almost all other ways of working. Because whether it's NLP or various schools of hypnotherapy or cognitive behavioral therapy or rational emotive behavior therapy or psychoanalysis or psychodynamic approaches, there's always an emphasis on either meddling around in the content of trying to figure out, what has happened, and or trying to fix or change what you think. Change your story, reframe, create a new story, correct your irrational thinking patterns and change them into more nuanced or rational thinking patterns, or process emotions and let them go, or change how you think, as they do in NLP, alter the structure of the experience. But what the psychological illusion model, metacognitive therapy, and the three principles all have in common is a very strong emphasis that you can leave the thoughts alone. You don't have to reframe them. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to fix them. You don't have to work on them. That, and also an emphasis that what you could call the mind or the psychological activity is self-regulating. Meaning that if you let these processes alone, there is an intelligence inside of us that works to balance us. and that a lot of the problem are all the attempts that we humans use to try to fix and analyze and change our own experience. Now, how we kind of go about guiding the particular client to have the realization that there is a self-correcting system and innate intelligence, and that we don't really have to do anything about our thinking. Well, here there are some stylistic differences. So I'll start with the psychological illusion model. The basic premise behind the psychological illusion model is that most of our psychological suffering are due to us misunderstanding our own experience. It's due to us not really seeing thoughts as thoughts, meaning making things up without realizing that we're doing it, and that we have a tendency to identify with these thoughts and then seemingly make a sense of self out of it. So in the psychological illusion model, there are we tend to use a lot of metaphors and stories, analogies, and thought experiments in an effort to help people discover the illusory nature of thought, to help them to have an experiential realization that thought itself is neutral. And when I say that thought itself is neutral, what I mean by that is, given that a particular thought construct appears, someone might have a very strong emotional experience, or they might be kind of neutral, or they might be amused. And that means that the thought itself has no inherent power to make us feel a particular way or to compel us to act. In metacognitive therapy, they call these thought fusions. So in the psychological illusion model, my background is also in neurolinguistic programming and hypnosis. And I view this tendency to kind of think without quite knowing that we're thinking. That's a bit like how hypnosis works. So there's a lot of playfulness with hypnotic phenomena and embodied experiences to help someone discover the illusory nature of thought and the neutrality of thought, and that the thing-like sense of self that the thoughts and feelings seem to revolve around is itself a thought-generated illusion. So there's a lot of thought experiments and hypnotic phenomena and stuff like that, not to mess with or change the content of experience, but as teaching tools and analogies to help people have what you could call a embodied realization. Now, in the three principles, there's of course also a lot of analogies and stories being used, but at the same time, there's a strong emphasis on not really doing anything. So the three principles point to what Sydney Banks called principles behind experience. The three principles being mind, which is the formless intelligence behind all of life, that which everything emerges out of. Thought, being the principle that takes, the formless energy behind life and makes it manifest or take the shape as seemingly something, as seemingly a multiplicity of separate objects appearing to a separate subject, right? That's kind of non-dual language. Sid didn't quite talk like that. But in my experience, what kind of allows us to have an experience is the principle of thought itself, and then consciousness being that which allows us to have an experience, to be aware, right? So in the three principles, it's essentially a an understanding where people are guided to discover and to see for themselves how these three principles essentially make up their moment to moment experience. So, in this particular way of understanding, feelings are an important part of the design to help us to realize when we are using the power of thought against ourselves in a way that so-called negative feelings are a warning sign that says, look, you're kind of using the power of thought in a way that's not very productive. And um, what what the psychological illusion model and the three principles have in common there is, in the psychological illusion model, there's not really a differentiation between mind and consciousness, but there is an exploration of the nature of consciousness itself, that which is prior to thought, and that which remains whenever a thought seemingly disappears or dissolves. So, in the psychological illusion model, there's a lot of emphasis on helping people to have an experiential distinction between thinking and being. And a lot of unnecessary suffering is due to kind of conflating the two, which makes it seem as if our very nature shares the limitations of these transitory thoughts and feelings. And I think that's what happens when people really explore the three principles as well. What's called the personal thinking looks less relevant. There's more of a trust that there is an innate health and innate wisdom that we are an expression of, and which essentially has our backs. One kind of important difference there too, regarding the three principles in the psychological illusion model, is that in the psychological illusion model, once it's seen as that there's no thing like self in there that's making decisions and choosing, this whole idea of free will becomes mute in the sense that there's no one there to have it. It's seen as a myth of sorts. But in the three principles, there is a lot of emphasis on how human beings have free will. So that is kind of a major difference. Now, in metacognitive therapy, there's as far as I can see, there's not a lot of emphasis on exploring the nature of consciousness itself. There is a kind of disidentification process, though, where people are helped to see that they are not their thoughts, they are the person who has a thought. So it kind of points in a similar direction, but it's more of a cognitive model in the sense that, oh, and this is important too, in the psychological illusion model, the whole psychiatric framework of mental illness is rejected. It's seen as a myth. Metacognitive therapy, still kind of, since it's a form of psychotherapy, plays the treatment mental illness frame to some extent. But what it frames it as is that what you call depression and anxiety and these sorts of things are the result of overthinking, of too much rumination, too much worry. So not the content of the thoughts themselves, but the relationship to them. And what they do in metacognitive therapy is that they do a very good job in pointing out these mechanisms of worry and rumination and threat monitoring and being hypervigilant and stuff like that. And they look at people's positive and negative metacognitions, meaning what beliefs does the person have about processes such as rumination or worry? Because that's largely what keeps these processes going. So they tend to focus on beliefs about controllability, meaning a lot of people think that they can't, really influence or turn the rumination or the worry on or off, and the metacognitive folks help people to discover that they can actually have choice about this. So that's an important belief. Another one is usefulness. That a lot of people think that they need to worry or they need to ruminate to avoid mistakes or to think their way out of problems. So that there's an exploration of to what extent these beliefs are useful. There's also an emphasis on how people can have negative, metacognitions around these processes, as in, the thoughts and feelings are dangerous. I might lose my mind or my body might collapse. So there's questioning and explorations around that, which then, through that exploration, helps people to discover the neutrality of thinking itself. And as a result of that, it makes less sense to them to ruminate and worry so much. So their symptoms tend to go away. There's also a lot of attention training on how to use your attention and become more outwardly focused. Um, and there's a slightly different emphasis on feelings. So, for example, in the three principles, there's this idea that the so-called negative feelings are part of the design in helping you to realize when you're using the power of thought in a way that's not too productive, and to kind of wake you up from that. And good feelings being a sign that the deeper wisdom is speaking through you. Whereas in the metacognitive therapy framework, there's more this emphasis that the depressed or anxious feelings are kind of the outcome of the rumination, um, and the worry. So I hope this little contrastive analysis is useful. Again, know that I'm hopelessly biased, since the psychological illusion model is my model and the one I've studied the most, obviously, since it's the one that I'm teaching. Um, I have I you know I did get introduced to the three principles back in 2013. I've read a lot. I've been to many seminars with major thought leaders in that field. And regarding metacognitive therapy, I got into that a few years ago because a few of my students who are Danish, who explore and teach the psychological illusion model, have also been studying metacognitive therapy. So through conversations with them and through reading all the available books on Amazon on metacognitive therapy, and watching what I've been able to find regarding podcasts and interviews on YouTube, I've gotten into metacognitive therapy. So if you are a student of the psychological illusion model, I highly recommend that you study and explore metacognitive therapy, and also the three principles and non-duality. I hardly mentioned that because these frameworks are somewhat different, but they have a lot of overlap, and they all point in the direction that you don't have to meddle with your thoughts. You can leave them alone. And that is very useful and very different from what most people think. I would love to hear your thoughts about this, whether you agree or disagree or what you have found. As always, know that I see clients from all over the world online. So if my ideas resonate with you and you would like to explore and see if you and I could be a good fit in terms of working together, I invite you to email me at provocativehypnosis.com. Also know that I'm having a seminar coming up. It's a 6-part online training on how to work with anxiety in all of its flavors. It's 3 weeknights in May and 3 in June. It's online. It's not just restricted to the psychological illusion model, but it's about how to also utilize other frameworks when that framework doesn't quite hit home. And it's based upon my 27 years of experience in seeing clients professionally. So if you're interested, go to provocativehypnosis.com, go to the seminar page. And also, should you be living in Australia or New Zealand, know that I'm doing a seminar in Australia in October this year, 2024. So in that case, I really hope to see you there. As always, thanks for listening.